Minutes after we recorded this interview, we got an update on the story. According to a report from The Blaze, the man we were talking about with the backpack, the guy who walked up to police outside the DNC on January 6th, 2021 and said, by the way, there's a bomb under that park bench. That man was not a passerby. He wasn't some random person. He was, in fact, a plainclothes officer with Capitol Police. Oh. So he wasn't just anybody, he was someone who worked for them. But they didn't tell us that for 3 years, even though they knew it. And even now, the FBI is not admitting this. The Blaze says they learned that this man was a police officer from congressional staffers. And as of this moment, we do not have that person's name, and authorities haven't weighed in one way or the other. But it's yet more evidence that they are lying about these pipe bombs. Why are they lying? Well, because they were involved in it, obviously. An awful lot has happened to American society and to the world over the past 3 years. But for our media and political class, most of it goes unmentioned because they're talking about something else. They're talking about January 6th, the most solemn day in American history, a moment worse than Pearl Harbor, worse than 9/11, worse than the American Civil War. That's what they're telling us. It's hard to respond to this because even now, 3 years later, most Americans have no real sense of what happened on January 6th, and any attempts to tell them have been suppressed by the big tech companies or shouted down by NBC News and CNN and other news organizations. That's odd if you think about it. Why do most of us have no real idea what happened? There's probably no event in American history that was filmed by more people from more angles than January 6th. And yet, until very recently, no one had put together a timeline. What happened? People walked, some of them from the White House to the Capitol, some of them went inside the building, and we've been talking about the aftermath. But how did all of that happen? It's on tape. Why haven't we seen it? Well, if you've watched Joe Biden recently, you know why you haven't seen it. Because January 6th is a perfect way for the Democratic Party, and by the way, the Republican Party, for the party that controls this country, the Uniparty, to get what it wants, to suppress the population, to keep Donald Trump from running for president again, and to put its enemies in jail. Just the other day, Joe Biden, often derided as senile, didn't seem senile at all as he gave a speech about January 6th. He seemed like a fascist. Watch this. Watch Joe Biden celebrate the fact that his political opponents were sent to prison, and listen as the crowd applauds him, bragging about how these Trump voters are rotting in prison. Watch.
Since that day, more than 1,200 people have been charged for assault on the Capitol. Nearly 900 of them have been convicted or pled guilty. Collectively, to date, they have been sentenced to more than 840 years in prison. What's Trump done? Instead of calling them criminals, he's called these insurrectionists patriots.
He's a vicious and cruel and hollow man and rarely gets the credit for any of that. But it was on display in that speech. It's on display all around us. And the only reason they get away with it is because, again, most of us have no real idea what actually happened on January 6th. But it is knowable because it was filmed from thousands of angles. And that tape still exists. To some extent, it's still being suppressed by the Republican Speaker of the House, by the way, who could release it but hasn't. Memo to the Speaker, go ahead and release that video. But there's still enough in the public domain that a group of filmmakers decided to put it all together. Now, there's very little editorial commentary in their new documentary. It's called January 6th, A True Timeline, and it should be the most famous film in the United States, but it's not. We're hoping that changes soon. The movie lays out the day's events moment by moment. It shows you what actually happened at the Capitol from video that they did not shoot, but collected once again from the public domain, in some cases from liberal journalists who were on the scene. And they discovered a lot. For example, at 2:24, while crowds outside the Capitol were still growing, the president, then President Trump, tweeted this: "The USA demands the truth." That's a very famous tweet. The January 6th Special Commission, the fake committee of liars who, quote, investigated January 6th, made reference to that tweet repeatedly. They claimed it was the reason that protesters breached the Capitol. But that's a lie, like so much of what they said. Video from that day collected in this documentary tells a very different story. At the moment that Trump tweeted that, Metro Police, law enforcement on the scene, appeared to have accidentally tear gassed themselves and run away from the scene. That's what the video shows. And that left a path to the Capitol wide open. But assess for yourself. Here's the video.
Our investigation found that immediately after the president's 2:24 p.m. tweet, the crowds both outside the Capitol and inside the Capitol surged.
What the January 6th committee failed to mention was that it was officers misusing munitions and CS gas at that same time that led to a surge. As officers on the West Plaza, unequipped with gas masks, struggle breathing, the plume of CS gas can be seen from the overhead camera on the lower right corner of your screen. It blows over the entire area of the West Plaza that the police had secured for nearly an hour. Within 3 minutes of the officer's CS gas misfire, the police line on the West Plaza entirely collapses.
So we now know that there were more than 200 plainclothes federal informants in the crowd. Some of them were already inside the Capitol before it was, quote, breached, before law enforcement opened the doors for the protesters in some cases. They were already inside, so you can draw your own conclusions from that. But we also know that a lot of law enforcement on the ground, those were local DC cops, Metropolitan PD, you saw on that tape, and some of the Capitol Police had nothing to do with any kind of setup. In fact, they were the victims of it. As you could see in that clip, law enforcement on the scene were completely overwhelmed. And the body cam video shot throughout the day shows that. You see cops repeatedly telling each other that leadership has failed them, and that's true, and that they've been, quote, set up. Watch this.
At 2:33 p.m., a frustrated police officer can be heard venting about being, in his words, set up.
They set up 64. Absolutely. And then they asked her to come 2 hours later. They set us up. We need everybody right away. Nah, right away. They set up a pizza. So now we ain't got a mother. They set up a
At the same time, police officers discuss being unprepared for what they encountered.
I didn't know we were coming up for this. I wanted to make sure we all had our masks.
I didn't realize how bad. They set us up to fail.
They did.
There was no way we were winning that. And now you got at least 4 platoons that are just gassed out.
Yeah, literally.
Because us, 54 doesn't have masks.
Yeah. Well, remember, we're supposed to be rapid response just to buy time for the other platoons to come.
They didn't come. They didn't ask for them.
Yeah. Those aren't racist insurrections. Those are cops, and they know exactly what happened. They got set up, and so did a lot of people that day. It wasn't like federal authorities didn't know there was going to be a big demonstration. They knew very well. They've been talking about it for weeks. It's not a guess. It's proven. It's a fact. So they knew what was up. They'd been set up. Now, one of the protesters you may recognize from that day is a man called Jacob Chansley, often called in the media the QAnon shaman. He's the guy with the painted face and horns. Now, the media repeatedly told us that he and Ashley Babbitt, the military veteran who was murdered that day, the unarmed woman who was shot to death by Michael Byrd, that he was a threat to public safety and completely out of control. But of course, the tape shows just the opposite, as does this documentary. When Metro PD made their way to the Senate floor and asked Chansley to leave, Chansley complied immediately. He thanked officers and said, quote, "God bless you," as he left. Watch this.
Let's go. Let's go.
Thank you.
Come on, let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Thank you, officer. God bless you guys.
For your patience, we really appreciate it.
Thank you for your patience. We love you. God bless you. That's what they said to the cops. Right? These are the racist insurrections. Jacob Chansley did a hard time in prison. But there he is telling cops he loves them as he walks peacefully, unarmed, out of the Senate chamber. So you may have concluded correctly that virtually everything you have heard, he screamed at you for 3 years about January 6th, is a lie. And this tape proves it. It's an hour long. It is well worth your time. We hope every American watches it and draws the obvious conclusion, which is that our leadership class is poisonous, power mad, and dangerous. They're the dangerous ones, not the people who showed up at the Capitol to protest the theft of their democratic election, the people who set it up in the first place. Joining us now is David Sumrall. He's one of the producers of this documentary, and we're very glad to have him join us. David, thanks so much for coming on. So you've been involved in trying to figure out what happened that day for the last 3 years, and you did this amazing public service for the rest of us by putting together this documentary. Tell us some of the things that you learned from this.
Well, I think it's the things we didn't learn from anybody else. The Select Committee had every opportunity with all the evidence to put a documentary out that showed what happened that day. And it's been interesting working with families, with the lawyers, all the defendants that we can find, that we can try to help, and go through this footage to find that their stories are all true that they tell. If you notice, nobody's been charged by the FBI for lying about what they witnessed on January 6th, which I think is a big point. But the discovery in this video, I think the public really needs to see, and that's why they've kept it hidden and dangled it like a carrot over the public for so long, for 3 years, when it tells that different story. And the hostages, they deserve to be released. There's no reason to keep people that were peaceful. Guys like Chansley, like you said, God bless you, and then they put him in prison. So I don't understand, why the public didn't understand more about it other than they couldn't see it. And I hope they are properly outraged from this film.
Well, they didn't understand it because the truth was hidden from them by outlets like NBC News. One of their buffoons was on TV the other day crying about the tragedy of January 6th, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the propaganda has been so aggressive and so relentless that, of course, people have no idea what actually happened. But you also have to wonder why. Why lie so assiduously about that day? I want to ask you specifically about the clip that we just played from your film of the officers on the scene, MPD, maybe some Capitol Police, saying that they were, quote, set up by their superiors. Why haven't we seen that before?
Once again, that would tell the different story, that the police felt just like the J6ers at that point. It was choreographed chaos, Tucker. There is no other excuse. They were woefully underprepared, equipment, intel, manpower, and that's intentional. You can prepare for failure, and that's what happened. And when the police realized it, they were very vocal about it. And I guess the Select Committee thought those tapes would never make it into court cases or into the public, but I'm glad they have.
Well, I'm not even sure it matters if they make it into court cases, because there's no news organization that will collate them all, put them in an order that we can understand, and show them to the public. I mean, the truth exists, just no one's bothered to gather it until you showed up. Why?
Well, there was no other way to get the video to the public unless it went through a court case. The government's kept everything so tight. All we had was access to public video, huge collection that we used for the movie. But the CCTV inside and outside the Capitol, and then the body cam footage, a lot of that went through court cases or was leaked by those sedition hunters that actively hunt J6ers. So when you understand there's groups out there that seem to be working, hand in hand with the government to hunt down J6ers, the innocent grandmas that were praying in the yard. And of course, you heard the other day they're going to start arresting people that were just on the property. You didn't have to go inside now. And they've been doing that. It's really no surprise, but they said they want 2,000 more arrests quite some time ago. And we're just seeing that now as they amp it up toward the election.
3 years later. So Mike Johnson, who kind of accidentally became Speaker of the House from Louisiana, says he's a conservative, a Christian, etc. He has the authority to release thousands of hours of tape from January 6th. He hasn't. Why do you think that is?
Self-protection, maybe. I don't know who's being threatened by who. I don't know, who's being held hostage or who's being told what. But for some reason, it just seems like that uniparty that we talked about last time. I see both sides working against us. We've met with Congress and Senate and staffers, and we've literally been told that they will not pursue charges against Capitol Police because they work together and they have to see each other every day. That is not justice, and these people demand and deserve justice for what happened to them that day. They literally were a peaceful crowd. It's been said so many times they were a violent mob, but the video shows they were peaceful until they were attacked by the police for over an hour, and then it was declared a riot. So there's definitely something amiss that the public needs to find out through communications of people that were in higher command places and governmental positions. There's a really big story here, and it just shows that both sides are kind of working together, brother.
We know that Michael Byrd, the Capitol Police officer, shot Ashley Babbitt to death, an unarmed woman, very short unarmed woman, military veteran, famously, and everyone in Washington celebrated her killing. But we often hear that many people died that day. It was a slaughter. Tell us, based on the evidence, who died that day and how?
So Benjamin Phillips was the first death, and he happened right around 1 o'clock before any of the real violence broke out. He had a medical emergency after the 12:55 gate push, and the problem with his death was he was never really given any support, any medical assistance. The medics were afraid to come into the property, and the protesters eventually carried him to an ambulance. The second was Kevin Greason.
May I ask you to pause right there? What kind of medical emergency did he have? How did he die? Do we know?
So stroke or heart attack, and nothing that had to do, from what we can tell, with any chemical irritants or any sprays or any violence or abuse or anything.
Okay.
But just I think he got really worked up. It shows him on his camera filming and screaming at the police. They were pushing people around, and he seemed to be really worked up, if it was a heart attack or something. But you remember, Tucker, they said he was not a part of the mob. He was not even on the property, is what the media told us forever, that he was out parking a bus somewhere. But we found him on the video, and that's the difference of getting access to this stuff.
Right.
And then the second death, Kevin Greason, he was right by the scaffolding, by the tower in the middle, and collapsed around, I can't remember what time off the top of my head, but right, 119, Tucker, I'm so sorry, because the grenade started at 121. So right before 120, he goes down, and we can't tell if he was, having a medical issue or what. But then the grenades were thrown into the crowd right in the area he was in. If he was having discomfort or something, we don't know if that could have contributed, but he was listed as a heart attack. But there's not a, relation to the cause of what caused or could have caused that heart attack, because it's the same timing. So we need more video in that area from citizens. And then the third death is Roseanne Boyland. And actually, in order, it would be Ashley Babbitt. And we know that Michael Leroy Byrd just literally assassinated her, judge, jury, executioner, and then protected, by the politicians as well.
Yes.
But then the fourth was Roseanne Boyland. And very, very tragic story. She was at the tunnel. The police excessively sprayed and gassed these protesters as they were shoving them out the tunnel, and massive trampling was taking place. And then we see Officer Lila Morris beating against the crowd with a long walking stick, and inadvertently probably striking striking Roseanne Boyland while she was on the ground unconscious. And so we don't know cause of death, as far as gas asphyxiation, the trampling, or the beating by the police officer. But that's a story that was told to be a drug overdose. And I want people to know, when you see this, it's not a drug overdose. It doesn't look anything like one. And that's that coroner having control over these stories to be able to, influence the media and influence our perception of what actually took place that day.
So just to be clear, so Roseanne Boyland has been written into history as a drug OD. But you don't think there's evidence that that's true?
No, absolutely not. The coroner actually said she had Adderall and coffee in her system, and that does not make methamphetamines. They literally, if you look it up, it still says she died of a methamphetamine overdose. And she was 7 years clean and sober. She was not on drugs that I'm aware of course, but she was there like everybody else, at the right place at the right time, and got caught in a bad spot, and was not able to escape the situation. When the paramedics got to her, after she'd been moved down the hall and drug across the entry to the tunnel there, the paramedics said she was in a pool of CS gas. That just screams excessive force. And she could not, gain her breath, and lost consciousness in the pile, and then was beaten. So, we're not the judge on that. Somebody needs to investigate, the officer that did that and the officers that are responsible for the tunnel scene.
Unfortunately, she's not George Floyd, so nobody cares. So far, you have 2 heart attacks, a woman who appears to have been asphyxiated by gas, beaten, died not of a drug OD. You have Ashley Babbitt, who was shot with no justification at all from a Capitol Police officer. That's 4. Then you have Officer Brian Sicknick. What can you tell us about his death?
So Officer Sicknick was taken to the police by Rod Taylor earlier in the day. He had suffered a stroke, and Rod took him to the police and said, this man needs medical assistance. The police assured him they would help him. Several hours later, another witness, a combat medic, Chris Alberts, who's in prison right now, offered to render aid to Officer Sicknick, recognized his name, and the police told him to mind his own business. He said, I'm a combat medic. This guy's having a stroke. His face is white. His lips are blue. And so later in the evening, when the paramedics reached Sicknick's body, they said they didn't know why he had collapsed, that the other police were doing CPR on him, but he was not in cardiac arrest yet. So they were doing CPR on a live guy, didn't know what was wrong with him, which screams that there was not a head injury, no head wound, or they would have said this is why he's unconscious. So that's all in the EMS reports. And as you dig the layers and levels of all the different intercommunications of these groups, you find more and more. And as usual, they tell on themselves by trying to brag. And we use that every time for the truth.
So that's 5 deaths. Any others?
Yes. No, and actually Sicknick didn't pass away until the next day. And of course, his story was used. His body was laid in state in the Capitol. They declared him a hero and buried him in Arlington National Cemetery, which is all fine. He is a hero, but he wasn't killed on January 6th. And he's really our hero for helping expose the truth of the lies of any administration or government that would use a death like that for political points against innocent people to further, terrorize them. And that's what we're seeing every single day. The arrests haven't stopped. And the torture is real to these people every day.
Amazing. How can people, and I just can't say strongly enough, I think people should watch this. How can they watch this?
They go to open.inc with a K, open.ink, and it's free. There's a nice article about it as well people can read, but we just encourage people to share it, add it to your list and add it to the memories of American history, because this is not being told by mainstream media or by pundits or anyone. And it seems like there's a definite effort from all politicians to silence this. And I don't know if it's just hijacked for the election or political points, but I know it's for power and control and more surveillance and more funding. They're insistent about those things. And to say it was an unprecedented day, Tucker, it was. Our government generally doesn't murder peaceful protesters, and literally we had another Tiananmen Square massacre right here in America where, peaceful, pro-democracy,
Here's how to kill bedbugs immediately, but there's one thing. What about the ones that are hiding that you can't get with a con?
And I tell people she's 21 years old. They're just taken back. Without Farmer's dog, I truly don't believe she'd be here today.
Imprisoned by the government and then silenced in an attempt to keep it that way for their own gain. And that's what the American people need to take away from this film. Open.ink.
David Summerall, thank you so much. Great to see you.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson's and happy Wednesday. It seems like ancient history now, but in the fall of 2021, not so long ago, America's supply chains came close to snapping. Remember this? More than 100 cargo ships were floating idly off the coast of LA and Long Beach. Those are the 2 biggest ports on the West Coast. Those ships were filled with consumer goods bound for stores and consumers across the country, but they couldn't offload them. There's no place to do it. The containers just sat there. And in any case, thanks to the Biden administration's vaccine mandates, there weren't enough truckers to pick up the cargo and take it anywhere. So all of that combined to create the worst shipping bottleneck in memory, and it lasted for months. The price of transporting goods to this country rose by 600%. So if you're wondering why inflation started to go up, that's a big part of the reason. Now, none of this happened by accident. The bottleneck was a man-made disaster, and it could have been, should have been, fixed by the people in charge of transportation. They're called the Department of Transportation. But for much of the time this disaster was unfolding, Joe Biden's Secretary of Transportation, that would be Pete Buttigieg of South Bend, Indiana, completely disengaged. He wasn't on the job. He was at home. He was on paid paternity leave, posing for selfies for social media. Now, Buttigieg didn't seem embarrassed at all by this. This is work, he said, though in fact he had played no role whatsoever in giving birth to a child. Quote, "It may be time away from a professional role, but it's very much time on." And actually it was time on television. Pete Buttigieg used his time to appear on various shows, including The View on ABC, where he spoke at length about his favorite subject, which is himself. Not the container disaster. Me. Meanwhile, the ships stacked up outside the ports and inflation went up. So that should conclusively have been the end of Pete Buttigieg's career as transportation secretary. Back to McKinsey for you. Whatever you think of his personal journey of self-discovery, there was an emergency in progress and Buttigieg ignored it. If anything is grounds for firing somebody, it's that. But the Biden administration did not fire Pete Buttigieg. They did the opposite. They praised him for breaking some important but not very well-defined glass ceiling of some sort that you're supposed to be excited about. They rewarded his dereliction of duty. So because people do respond to incentives, Pete Buttigieg kept doing it. He kept proudly ignoring his job. Weeks after a train derailed in East Palestine, Ohio, causing an actual environmental disaster throughout the whole region, Pete Buttigieg, as of tonight, has still not visited East Palestine. Why? What has he been doing? Well, as he explained to a Daily Caller reporter last night, he's taking more personal time. I'm taking some personal time, not just a robot, but a nasty one. Could I get a photo of you? And then he did. Now you wonder what Pete Buttigieg is going to do with that photo. Makes you shiver a little bit if you think too much about it, so we're going to stop. Meanwhile, outside Mayor Pete's nifty little cocoon of bistros and Instagram selfies, life goes on in America, and in many places it is getting tougher. Not that he cares, even a little bit. Here's the mayor of East Palestine on February 16th, nearly 2 weeks after the derailment, explaining that he'd heard nothing from Pete Buttigieg. Watch. That was last week. He still didn't go. This week, people in East Palestine are coughing up blood. We know that because we talked to a couple of them last night. But still, Pete Buttigieg has not shown up. Donald Trump has, by the way. He went today. He's not able to fix the problem. It's not like he's the Secretary of Transportation. But Trump did bring pallets of bottled water and then bought the entire fire department dinner at McDonald's. What do you think of Trump? At least he cared enough to go there. That's something. In fact, it's enough to make you wonder how someone who clearly doesn't care at all, not even a little bit, who doesn't even care enough to pretend he cares, wound up with one of the most important jobs in the Biden cabinet. A job with actual responsibilities. How did he do that? Well, we know what the answer is. No, Pete Buttigieg doesn't know anything about transportation. We would bet money he can't drive a stick shift. On the other hand, Pete Buttigieg is gay. He plays the piano, and he speaks Norwegian. Let's hire him. Watch.
There he was yesterday, front and center, now third in the polls with a speech that many have said are historic.
He's inspirational so far, and that's something that voters absolutely want.
He has this appeal for a lot of reasons. He is a veteran. He is openly gay. He is from Indiana.
You are a concert pianist. You speak many languages, including Norwegian, that you learned because you wanted to read a book.
The second coming of Obama, huh? We'll see about that. My prayers may have been answered if that's true.
The draw to this point has been young, fresh, positive, and a change agent.
This guy is chicken soup for my soul.
So you sort of long to see Pete Buttigieg fired from his job. It's nothing personal. How many people who hate Pete Buttigieg, what Pete Buttigieg is actually like or how well his Norwegian actually is irrelevant. You long to see him fired because you long to see someone at some point held accountable for disasters. When the Biden administration pulled out of Afghanistan and armed the Taliban with one of the largest militaries in the entire region, no one was punished. The only person in the U.S. military that we're aware of who was punished for that debacle was the guy who complained about it. That's it. No one was ever punished for COVID. When it turns out the vaccines didn't do what they thought what they told us they were going to do. When the lockdowns hurt more people than they helped. When Fauci was caught lying about virtually everything, not one person was punished. So it would be encouraging to see someone punished for this debacle, for the 1,000 train derailments we have every year, as Pete Buttigieg blithely informed us the other day. But Pete Buttigieg has not been fired, and he likely won't be. Why is that? Well, we're thinking it's because he's on board with the core idea of the Biden administration, and that is equity. And equity means we're going to make decisions based on how you look. And Pete Buttigieg is all in on that. Watch him explain that actually all lives don't matter.
In 2015, you said that all lives matter when you spoke about two police controversies that were happening in South Bend. Was that a mistake?
What I did not understand at that time was that that phrase, just early into mid, especially 2015, was coming to be viewed as a sort of counter slogan to Black Lives Matter. And so this statement that seems very anodyne and something that's kind of nobody could be against actually wound up being used to devalue what the Black Lives Matter movement was telling us. Since learning about how that phrase was being used to push back on that activism, I've stopped using it in that context.
Imagine apologizing for saying all lives matter. No, they actually don't all matter, says the head of the Department of Transportation. And you can see now that he means it. A train derails on his watch in a town full of high school educated Trump voters who nobody cares about and have been left behind, and they are further ignored. But that's not environmental racism. No, it's equity. So clearly, he knows. All lives don't matter, and he's being rewarded for it. Victor Davis Hanson is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute and joins us tonight to assess. Professor, thanks for coming on. Wouldn't it be nice to see somebody pay some price for ineptitude and indifference?
Yeah, it would. He's jumped the proverbial shark, though. He's the epitome of the empty resume class. I mean, his only qualifications for the job were his identity politics credentials and the fact that he went to Harvard and Oxford, and the media and the bi-coastal elite gaga over him. But otherwise, Tucker, he had the un-Midas touch. Everything he's touched, whether it was the port crowding at our major ports, or the train robbing of trains going into the ports, or these recent 4 accidents where airliners almost crashed, or the Southwest implosion, or the whole meltdown during the holiday season of our airline system, or these rail car, everything he either ignores or he offers these platitudes. And how ironic that right on the eve, or right in the midst, I should say, of this tragedy in East Palestine, of this white working class tiny community with an average income about $45,000, he was lecturing the nation that white hard hats don't look like the community they are working in, and that's not true. It's not only that is he pandering, but he's often
You want to give us everything?
Your stepmom? We can pay off the house with that money.
We're going to be your disciples.
Who do you think has the popular vote, Donald Trump or Kamala? We're running a quick poll to see where Trump stands against.
Here in California, most of the construction workers you see on the elite coast are Hispanic, and most of the residents are white upper-class people. That's just the way America works. But he always tries to, in lieu of actually doing something, he always tries to have a rhetorical or an abstract victory. And I think people finally just feel, they're tired of him. And he's afraid. He talks very bold and like he's bold and he's dynamic, but he's very cowardly because he's afraid to go in and confront these people and tell them why that FEMA wasted 2 weeks before they addressed their concerns, and why he hasn't been there. And we know the reason is that he doesn't want to sit there and talk to people when they ask him questions he can't answer. And so he's just sort of what this entire cabinet is. That this cabinet was either predicated on being an identity politics first in their field, so to speak, or they were candidates that pulled out and gave the nomination to Joe Biden. But otherwise, none of them had any demonstrable experience or expertise in the field that they were supposed to serve us, the people.
That's right. It's just a little bit funny. They've been lecturing us now for 2 years about something called environmental racism, and then there's an actual environmental disaster in the midst of a community of people who didn't vote for them, and they ignore it. That actually does look like environmental racism to me.
It is, and the reason is that East Palestine is right on the border of Pennsylvania, and it's in Klinger. It's the very area that in 2008 Barack Obama blasted as they cling to their religion, and then we know how Joe Biden has called Trump supporters chumps and dregs, and we know the irredeemables and deplorable vocabulary of Hillary Clinton. So they have a long record of disparagement of the white working class. I don't know why they think they can just get away with it so easily without some kind of reaction, but it is racist. And if this was in Malibu, or this was in Martha's Vineyard, or even in Compton or South Central, there would be an immediate U.S. government response by this administration.
Right, among the rich or the fashionable poor, but these people fall through the cracks every single time. Vic James Hansen joining us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So as we said, the Biden administration has effectively done nothing to respond to an actual environmental disaster. Donald Trump, by contrast, visited the town today, and he bought a lot of McDonald's for cleanup crews and for firemen. He handed out bottled water, including Trump water. Trump also thanked John Rourke of the Blue Line Moving Company for bringing water to people who live there. Watch.
And I want to thank those of you that helped John Rourke, who's fantastic, Blue Line Moving. Is John here? Hello, John. Good job. Got a lot of trucks coming up with water, right? That's true. You're a fantastic guy.
John Rourke with Blue Line Moving joins us right now. John, thanks so much for coming on. What did you see there? I'm embarrassed to say we have not been there, but what was your impression of what's happening in East Palestine?
My impression, Tucker, thanks for having me on, is that the folks there are a whole lot more motivated than they were at this time yesterday, and that's a fact. The fact that President Biden has refused to come to this small town when he's supposed to be Scranton Joe, a small town hero of the working man, and he can't even show his face in a town of American citizens that need his leadership, that need the government's help terribly. And he proved what everybody I think already knew in this country, is that he's not the leader for this country, and that Donald J. Trump is the leader that we all know he is, and he is the leader of this country, and he proved that today. That was leadership that I saw today. I saw people standing on the streets screaming for this man, chanting USA, USA. I mean, it just gives me goosebumps, and to have President Trump personally thank me, I mean, it almost brought me to tears, man, to be honest. I'm just a humble guy. I'm a working man, family man, and to be able to, have someone like him thank me personally was a big deal for me and my family.
I bet it was. So really, just kind of big picture for one second, since you were there. 2015, Trump emerges out of nowhere, then he becomes the nominee, and the media starts saying, wait, there are a lot of forgotten people in forgotten towns that built this country, people who were born here and have been completely ignored. Maybe we should pay some attention to these people who were dying younger than the rest of us. I don't think that ever happened. Did the people of East Palestine, who you spoke to, feel like anyone was paying attention to them in power?
Absolutely not. I mean, these people need help. Okay, well, we're putting illegal aliens in hotels and five-star accommodations in New York City, and the people of East Palestine can't even get a real hotel to stay in for a significant amount of time, or some real money that they can actually go maybe and get their own VRBO or something like that, somewhere where they can actually take a month and get away from the town and get away from breathing in that nasty air and having to see hundreds of workers. Every river, every tributary has hoses in it and aerators in it, and they're spraying water into these rivers, and who knows where the water's coming from. People don't have any idea what the hell is going on in their town right now in East Palestine. They have no idea, and that's because of people like Pete Buttigieg and Joe Biden. They literally have no idea what they're doing, and that's why they're not there, because someone will call them out, and that's what they're afraid of.
Yeah. Those guys are very